Business Nation continues. Once again, David Faber.
Each year, the government gives billions of your tax dollars to farmers. That money was originally intended to help small farmers weather hard times. But as we found, most of it goes to America's wealthiest farmers, and millions end up in the bank accounts of people who barely farm at all. With a bitter debate now raging on Capitol Hill, correspondent Bob Faw investigates the cash crop.
You know them as captains of industry. Billionaire media mogul Ted Turner, the country's fifth richest man, Microsoft's Paul Allen, and former WorldCom CEO Bernie Ebbers, worth over $1 billion before he went to prison for massive accounting fraud. But you probably don't know that all these men claim to be farmers, and the government agreed and gave them fat subsidy checks. Those are just a few of the fat cats that got government payouts, according to Ken Cook of the Environmental Working Group, a research and advocacy organization which compiles U.S. Department of Agriculture data.
Taxpayers have an expectation that when they're supporting farmers through subsidy programs, that we're asking people if they need the money before we give it to them, like we do for student loan guarantees, or we do for welfare programs, or food stamps. Absolutely.
So you're saying it's going to people who don't really need it?
Yeah, well, you know, it's going to people who need it, and it's going to people who don't need it. And the problem is we're not distinguishing between the two groups.
Chase Manhattan's David Rockefeller, the late Ken Lay of Enron, even the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein, all multimillionaires getting your tax dollars.
It simply comes down to this. If you happen to have owned the right land, you get the subsidies. It doesn't really matter how wealthy you are.
What qualifies as the right land may seem downright absurd. Once those parcels are designated for subsidies, like some of the land owned by Ted Turner, the owner of that land and any subsequent owner can get cash from the government, even if the land is no longer being farmed.
So if I buy land that's received subsidies in the past, I'm entitled to continued subsidies in the future.
You don't have to plant a seed.
You don't have to get dirt under your fingernails. You don't have to work the land.
You don't have to work on the farm. You don't ever have to sit in a tractor seat. In fact, you don't even have to be alive. You can get farm subsidy benefits if you're dead under current rules.
That is no exaggeration. The government has given over $1 billion to the estates of dead farmers, many who'd bought the farm years earlier. Critics say that proves the farm subsidy program has lost sight of its original purpose, saving the family farmer. Those payments started during the Depression, when thousands of farmers lost their land and livelihoods. The subsidies were supposed to be a temporary fix to a national crisis, but instead they've become a national fixture. Last year, the government gave $16 billion to producers of staples like corn, rice, and cotton. 2/3 of that money went to the richest 10%. While more than 60% of the nation's farmers receive nothing at all.
We're selling these programs to the public, if you listen to the commodity lobby, on the basis of saving family farms. But it's a very cynical argument when you look at who's really getting the money, which is very large farming operations getting larger all the time, whereas lots of small and medium-sized farmers in the United States get absolutely nothing.
According to small farm operators, those fat subsidies to big farms helps drive the little guy out of business.
So in the name of saving the family farm, we have a system in place that's leading to their demise. We're funding the big guys, giving them the down payment to buy out their neighbors.
Embarrassing headlines have occasionally prompted Congress to limit payments to the very rich, but to oblige the farm lobby, Congress has then provided plenty of loopholes to skirt those limits. That explains, for example, why California's biggest subsidy recipient, Constance Bowles, was able to receive $2 million for her interest in a Merced, California farm. Ms. Bowles is better known as a San Francisco socialite and patroness of the arts. This wing of the San Francisco Fine Arts Museum is devoted to her collection of 18th century British porcelain.
It doesn't really matter how wealthy you are. There are ways to get around whatever few limits we do have.
Then there is Maurice Wilder, owner of 8 Tampa office buildings, over a dozen RV parks, an 8,000-acre bison and elk hunting ranch, and 100,000 acres of farmland. Mr. Wilder is also a recipient of government aid.
Do you know how many recipients, according to government figures, receive more in commodity subsidy payments than you did last year?
No, I don't know.
Would it surprise you if I told you only one recipient was greater than yours?
That could be possible, yes.
The government gives Wilder $1 million a year to help him farm. Wilder says crop prices have been so low, it was critical to get those payments.
They were instituted to help struggling farmers.
Right.
You're hardly a struggling farmer.
We haven't really been successful in making a profit in farming in the past few years. Without the government, we wouldn't have been able to make a profit.
Without the government, you wouldn't be in farming.
We wouldn't be in farming. It wouldn't be for the government assistance.
They all protest and say we need the money to stay in business, but there's never any need to offer evidence in applying for the program.
Critics say the average American should not be forced to bail out America's wealthiest businessmen, while truly needy farmers are hurting and nearby communities are slowly dying. This is Elaine, Arkansas, in an area which the USDA says is the 5th largest recipient of farm aid, aid which its advocates say is the lifeblood of the Mississippi Delta. If that's true, says one local resident, we really need to be on dialysis because very little of that federal money is ending up here. Lisa Shames of the Government Accountability Office says much of the money ends up in huge farming operations arranged, on paper anyway, to get the maximum government subsidy. She told us about one of the country's biggest recipients of aid, Tyler Farms in southeastern Arkansas. Shames says Tyler gamed the system with a typical scheme. The farm was subdivided, on paper, into separate corporations, in this case 66 separate corporations, allowing it to multiply its government aid 66 times over.
If a farm is organized, say, into 5 entities, or 11, or 30, or 66, you can multiply out the benefits you are entitled to receive?
Yes, that's right.
You can keep maximizing. No, it's a paper farm in effect,
Yes.
but it entitles me to get the benefit.
That's right. It can be set up legally, yet the intent is to evade the farm program payment limitation.
Congressional sources tell CNBC that the Arkansas landowner who created the 66 entities is David Brooks Griffin. He maximized payments so well that in 9 years, Tyler Farms received nearly $37 million in aid. After all that money drew national attention, the farm's 66 entities were reorganized again into 7 smaller farms, less likely to face scrutiny. But they still reaped an additional $16 million over a 3-year period. The GAO referred the case to USDA investigators, who said it was all perfectly legal. We wanted to speak with Mr. Griffin, shown here leaving on his helicopter, but he refused. So instead, we set out to find some of the people Griffin enlisted as owners of those smaller farms. It took some hunting for us to find Quimbia Potts.
I'm a partner in 3 different farms.
The government lists him as a part owner of several of the smaller farms, but like many listed as owners of paper farms, Potts appeared to be an owner in name only.
I really don't know all I know about it now. I'm honest about it.
Well, tell me what you do know. You sign a piece of paper at some point?
Yes, I signed a piece of paper.
And then what?
That's about it. I run the dirt buggies. I do whatever it takes. The manager of that farm, he calls a shot on the seed.
The government paid the farms $340,000 based on Potts' role as an owner, but Potts sounds more like an employee.
Well, the records indicate over 3 years you received $340,000.
To the farms.
Through the farm payments, that's right. But did you put that money in your bank account?
Yeah, no.
Where'd it go?
As far as I know, it goes to the farm. And if it didn't go to the farm, I wouldn't have no job. These other bastards wouldn't have no job. David Griffin wouldn't own all this land and give these people a job.
Critics say owners like Potts prove that the paper farms are really legal fictions designed to get as much money from the government as possible. Not so, says Griffin's attorney, Robert Serio.
You telling me this was not a scheme to get around those limitations?
No, sir, it certainly was not.
It simply was an attempt to comply with the law.
It wasn't an attempt to comply, it was in compliance.
Serio wouldn't talk to us about his clients, but he was willing to offer advice on how to structure a farm business.
Let's just say that you're a father and son. A father and son would have 6 entities they could designate if they're arranged properly.
If they are arranged
That's
properly.
correct, if they're arranged properly.
What's the greatest number of properly arranged farms that you've set up?
A lot. I'm not going to go into that detail.
Serio defends payments to the biggest farmers, saying they provide America with a cheap, safe food supply and face the same risks as smaller farmers.
20% of the farmers produce something like 80-something% of all the grain in the United States. Well, it would appear to be logical. They're going to get 80-something% of the payment.
That's assuming an entitlement to payments. I would argue against that.
United States Secretary of Agriculture Mike Johans wants to cut subsidies to the wealthiest Americans and get rid of the law that has encouraged the creation of large paper farms.
Did it enhance any farming operation in America, make it more efficient, assist in producing better products? No, it didn't do any of those things. It just simply created a line of business, if you will, to create legal entities.
Legal entities whose only purpose is to get more of your tax dollars.
If you want to farm the whole county, have at it. This is America. We let people do that in this country if they want to grow their operation, but there's no reason the taxpayers have to be involved every step of the way.
Congress is now weighing a new farm bill and debating whether to limit payments to the very rich. The likelihood that that will happen? The smart money says, don't bet the farm on it. We'll be right back.